Asta and Libe, in the final moments of their Devil Union mode, successfully managed to cut the King of Devils, Lucifero, into pieces. And as they stood there menacingly above this once perceived to be ever-powerful entity, the creature was in a state of complete and utter disbelief. His reality was the making of a ridiculous impossibility. He would further lament that such a thing couldn't possibly be happening. After all, he is the greatest devil in existence, the Lucifero, the apex of his devilish kind with the absolute most powerful magic. No one could ever hope to harm him. This was the very reality he had experienced, understood, and felt comforted by for an eternity. Yet now, these two fledglings, who possess absolutely no magic at all, had not only harmed him, but cut him down. It was all too much to bear, and as such, the fiend would refuse such a result, angrily exclaiming that there was no way he could ever lose. As they would suddenly feel it, the crushing gravitational pressure induced by Lucifero's magic, which firmly planted the two brothers on the ground. Both were shocked by this sudden outburst, despite all the damage Lucifero had sustained only just before. And things were especially rough because Libe was at his limit. He couldn't coat their body in enough anti-magic to negate the gravitational effects, from which point, the fleshy remains that were Lucifero would begin to rise as they remained planted beneath him. And understandably angered, he'd reprimand the two for looking down on him, furthermore making it clear that half of his strength was still down in the underworld, meaning he wasn't at his full power just yet. Otherwise, such weaklings could not have possibly pushed him to such an extent, very clearly refusing the circumstances he was now faced with. And on account of the tangent we went on in a previous video, a number of people felt the need to bring up the fact that, like the guy saying right now, Lucifero was not at 100% yet, believing this to be telling of the fact that he still had more fight left in him. That things were not over just yet, but as indicated here and by the remainder of the chapter, that is simply not the case, unfortunately enough for those people. Although, unless such manifestation came along with the missing 50% that would make Lucifero an interesting, memorable, and or worthwhile character, honestly you can keep it. But as Lucifero flailed about in refusal, the hopefully interesting devil that came along with him, Adramelech, would continue to observe. And Lucifero was looking downright pitiful in this display, crying out that the two could not do anything anymore, that they should simply fall and be crushed, just continuing to curse their names by saying that in the end, it was their loss, calling them pieces of repulsive filth. As just then, a black spear would emerge in front of him. Again, this would be the combined magical efforts of Captain Yami and Vice Captain Noct of the Black Bulls, as they would emerge from the darkness together, much to the annoyance and concern of Lucifero. Both bloodied and still very much impaled by the severed hands of Lucifero, these two in union would let it be known that here and now, they would surpass their limits. From which point Lucifero began to retort by saying that the resistance was futile and they still could not attack him. Furthermore, the boy could not even stand. Yet before the devil could even finish that sentence, he would hear the dragging of a massive blade across the ground as his eyes would widen and bulge. It was Asta. He had risen back to his feet. The gravitational influence of the monster was no longer a factor thanks to Yami and Noct, and of course, Asta's physical prowess and endurance is unmatched, so it makes sense that he would be able to will his body in such a way. And Lucifero was clearly disturbed and unsettled. Time after time after time while facing this kid, Lucifero's understanding of logic has been challenged, defied, and utterly dismantled. Asta, this deviant that stood to subvert all expectations, would now huff and puff in his bloody state, and Lucifero's expression would swiftly shift to one of certain fear. The fiery desire of vengeance was visible in Asta's eyes, and as he lifted his blade, Lucifero shuddered, which prompted a bit of laughter from Yami, as he would have to wonder if this almighty king of devils was afraid of some kid. Lucifero would then grit his teeth and immediately begin to flee like a coward. As from over his shoulder, the devil would yell out, speaking of next time. The next time they meet, he'd be sure to kill them all, and do so with his full power. A downright embarrassing display that only serves to make the memory of this character that much more unsavory. But to cut him off would be the sudden appearance of one of Yuno's teleportation stars, one of which would be positioned near Lucifero and the other back above Asta. This would then suddenly teleport Asta within striking range as he lifted his sword overhead. And at this point, Lucifero with his eyes wide would notice Yuno, as the Spade Kingdom Prince would question the notion of them all meeting again, as there wasn't going to be a next time, confirming as much by way of Asta as he would finally deliver the killing blow onto Lucifero in brilliant fashion. And what a spectacularly incredible shot this was. Absolute eye candy. Yet unfortunately that is all we can compliment about this devil in the grand scheme of things. The visuals alone, as beyond that, I have a hard time even considering him to be a character at all. But after doing this, Asta would collapse yet again, as all his comrades would either be in disbelief or smiling. It was over. They had done it. As from above would be the sound of clapping, and clapping by way of a Dremelac who had a smile on his face. He would congratulate them for their total victory as Lucifero lay dead, his mouth agape, as Asta now had a Chibi Libe on his shoulder. Now this chapter of Black Clover was especially controversial. This was most definitely make or break for a lot of people, and from the looks of things, it's a lot more break. Lucifero, to be quite honest, was a garbage antagonist, especially for a character that had been hyped up for so long. He was an utter disappointment to say the very least. Frankly, Zagreed was several times better than this guy in pretty much every regard. There is still hope for Addy being an interesting character, which I'm certainly hoping for, but that does not change the fact that Lucifero was so pathetic. He was nothing more than a combative obstacle to be overcome by our heroes. He was afforded no agency at all beyond being a byproduct of escalation. And even then, as stated before, the application of his magic was mediocre at best. He just hits really hard. There are side characters with more interesting magical abilities. There's also the fact that not a single one of our combatants will be leaving this conflict in any way that is at all disadvantageous in the slightest. Nobody at all. Black Clover does not kill its characters. And one might argue that Lucifero was just killed in this very chapter, but to that, the point still stands. Black Clover does not kill his characters. Lucifero is not a character, not really at least. Yet even then, for as problematic as the failure that is Lucifero may appear to be, I do not believe that this character alone is the primary issue to be addressed. Rather, it is my understanding that Lucifero is merely the straw that broke the camel's back, the final catalyst of sorts that served to trigger the ultimate disillusionment of many readers. For a story to not only grip viewers but maintain that hold, particularly in regards to Battle Shonen, stakes are absolutely necessary. And it is after getting this far, after being presented with the prospect of insufferable and unending cataclysmic carnage at the hands of devil kind, only to then have absolutely no meaningful ramifications in the aftermath of such confrontations, that has confirmed the true extent of our worst fears. There is nothing to fear. Now mind you, shonen is an incredibly vast genre, and so I won't pretend that there aren't other series out there guilty of similar grievances. Take some of the most popular and powerful franchises in the world such as Dragon Ball and One Piece for instance. In the case of Dragon Ball, by way of the series namesake, mortality is hardly much of an issue at all, considering a simple wish may serve to mitigate such dangers. However, despite Dragon Ball villains tending to be several times more powerful than our heroes just as Lucifero stood to be, most fans don't feel betrayed by the realization of their power. The build up to such a point feels justified. Meanwhile again, Lucifero was hyped up for a very long time, only to be an empty character. I mean hell, even the wordless Kid Buu had some semblance of personality. Then in regards to One Piece, oftentimes it feels like no matter how insane the situation they may find themselves in, characters just don't die. And this is an issue I've had with that series for years and years despite loving it so much. The difference being that One Piece places its stakes elsewhere, to the point where in many cases, death would be a mercy. And when Oda does kill a character, it is monumental. Speaking of which, even beyond this arc, there are no meaningful deaths in Black Clover. Sure, you could argue with characters such as Morgan, Richita, or Ashir Silva, yet all of those characters were made to die. Their relevance in the story entirely revolves around their demise, and is evident from the very first moment we encounter them. The Dark Triad mostly all appear to be dead at this point, but such deaths were not really provided much agency, as the devils swiftly took their places to unsatisfying effect. And I mean, if you can only kill villains, that's kinda just like a Disney movie. Regaining the faith of readers in this sense is likely to be an arduous task, all things considered. Yet there is the question if Tabata even cares to. After all, even despite the grievances of some, it is still his story, and if this is what he desires of it, then it is what it is, so be it. After all, there are plenty of fans who don't mind a lack of stakes or depthless antagonists, presumably because they enjoy the protagonist enough to make up the difference, which is certainly a strength of the series lacked by others. So it is certainly a give and take sort of thing. As with all entertainment, the enjoyment of it all depends on the consumer and what they value. So this isn't to say that you should feel ashamed for enjoying the series either way. And if on the flip side you feel disappointed, you are well within your rights to feel as such. Quite honestly, at least in this respect, Black Clover hasn't really changed. It has been this way. For some people, they are getting exactly what they signed up for, while for others, that lack of development and or growth kinda sucks. But that's enough for this tangent. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.